Welcome back, America. Thanks for listening. Joined now by Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming. She is the chairman of the House Republican Conference, the third-ranking member of the GOP in the House of Representatives. Good morning, Congresswoman Cheney. Great to have you back.
Hi, Hugh. Great to be with you as always.
I want to ask about your mom and dad. I saw your dad for lunch a couple of months ago. He looked better than I'd seen him look in 20 years. How's he doing? How is your mom doing?
They're both doing well. They're being obviously extremely careful. You know, my dad's got a compromised immune of his transplant, so he's one of the people that are particularly susceptible. Have to be very careful right now. So they're being very responsible and careful, and we're doing a lot of FaceTime dinners with them and things like that. But they're both doing well, and my mom actually is working on another book, which should be out later on this.
The Virginians, right? The Virginia presidents.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful topic. Looking at the first four of the first five presidents who were born within about a 10-mile radius or so of each other in Virginia, and just that miraculous period of our founding. It's a wonderful book. I've had the opportunity to read the first couple chapters of it, and really excited and proud of her.
Looking forward to it. I thought Madison, her book on Madison, ought to have won the National Book Award. It did groundbreaking work. I'm looking forward to the same thing. I don't know much about Monroe, but I wonder if they have the same frustration I do, Congresswoman, which is I can't see my grandkids because they're little balls of kryptonite for people who are over 60. Drives me crazy.
Exactly. That is a conversation, but we've gone a long way in terms of learning how to use family FaceTime, teaching them.
Great. I'll bet you that's a treat because he never touched a computer. All right, let me talk about serious stuff. I am very disappointed in Speaker Pelosi. I can't even begin to tell you how disappointed I am in Speaker Pelosi. What is your assessment? It's so partisan when we should not be partisan, but yet I mean, she comes out of the Baltimore machine. San Francisco's a machine. She just can't shed her partisan approach.
I mean, Hugh, just think about how sad it is for the country that she is running the House of Representatives right now. I mean, we have got small businesses all over this country in the middle of this economic and public health crisis that are depending on these loans that we've been able to get out the door for their very survival. They need these loans. They're a life raft. We are in a position where the money has been oversubscribed. We've got to appropriate more. The White House would like more. The Republicans in the House would like more. The Senate needs more. We could do it quickly. We could do it this week. And she's standing in the way, and she's delaying once again. I think it is, really shameful given the fact that we are in the middle of a crisis. And she's been really public over the course of this crisis in terms of saying that she plans to use it to get agenda items that they believe in passed because the legislation is must pass. We've got to come together as a nation and put aside party differences. There are many members of the House and Senate on both sides who are doing that, but the Speaker of the House is not one of them.
I have not yet played one time the video of her visiting Chinatown in San Francisco when we knew that asymptomatic transmission was possible, because I thought there is no purpose in looking back and scoring points. There just isn't. And this radio show was on this from January 20th, 40 forward. I got nothing to worry about if we look backwards, but I just don't see any point in it. I do see a point in replenishing this fund. I told the listeners before you joined, Congresswoman Cheney, the Nixon Foundation, which I helm, has got 36 plus employees, and I had to make a choice. And luckily, the small business loan covers us. We don't have any admission revenue. We don't have any events revenue. I was going to have to lay off people. I don't have to lay off people because Pacific Mercantile Bank got our application and there's money left. But that will not be the case unless the Congress replenishes the funds for thousands of other businesses.
Yeah, we are in an absolutely unprecedented economic crisis, and it is unprecedented because we're obviously facing the crisis of the coronavirus because we've had to basically shut the economy down. We want these small businesses to be able to operate when we come out of this. We need them to be able to operate. They're the backbone of the economy. The only way to do that is if we provide relief right now. And the Speaker of the House, I don't frankly know how she can live with herself, knowing that she is holding this up when it is just desperately needed funding for the American people. And she did it the last go-around, too, when we were talking about funding for health care, funding for the kinds of research and mass commercial production we're going to do when we get to the point where we've got therapeutics that we know are working. It's as their leader in the House.
Well, we know what Rahm Emanuel said famously, not allowing this to go to waste, but I do not believe Leader McConnell will allow anything that smacks of opportunism. Anything. There are three things I'd like to talk about with you. First of all, in the first round, 2.2 trillion. I'm just going to, it was phase three, but it was the first major funding bill. There was not much money for defense, no money for anything pointed towards China, reallocation of assets, no new ships. We didn't forward fund the Columbia class, which could do in a lump sum transfer to whoever builds it. Constitutional, it's appropriate. Will you allow that to happen again? No money for defense in a $2.2 trillion bill that is in response to a Communist Party of China's indifference to the world?
Look, I think you're absolutely right, Hugh. We've got to make sure that we include resources for defense. I think that we have to take a look at China from an entirely new perspective. Frankly, I think that there are many of us who've been from China for a number of years. I think what we've seen now with this is, people who have been ignoring it or looking the other way back. And it is a threat that we face that is all encompassing. I mean, if you look at what you're mentioning in terms of what the Chinese have been able to do from a military perspective, the extent to which we cannot let them have an advantage. We've got to make sure that we overcome them in a whole range of areas. Look at what they've been able to do with respect to supply chain. And that is in and of itself a national security threat. The extent to which they now produce so many of the pharmaceuticals that we need, produce so many of the components that go into pharmaceuticals that are produced in other countries, and the real national security threat that poses. When you combine the fact that the Chinese control the supply chain for critical pharmaceuticals we need, with the extent to which we know that they have been able to steal so much of our vital information, when you think about what they're able to do in terms of the kind of cyber war that they've launched on us, think about the combination of the Chinese knowing key information about key officials, for example, and the extent to which they are able to produce pharmaceuticals and may have access to health records. I mean, it is a nightmare scenario in a whole range of ways, including the fact that the United States has almost no capability anymore to produce simple generic antibiotics, which are absolutely crucial life-saving medicines. We cannot allow this to go on, and it's going to be very important that we ensure that we find ways that we basically say, all right, that's it, no more supply chain. We've got to move that supply chain out of China, while we also are combating them from a military perspective around the world and frankly, in space as well.
Your colleague Congressman Gallagher and Senator Cotton have introduced the pharmaceutical stand-up bill in the United States. I'm all for that. And the Speaker wants to help state and local governments. I wouldn't object if that money was targeted towards hardening cyber systems of the state and local governments and increasing their ability at the state attorney general's level to surveil for PRC, nefarious activities. So there's some things you can do for the state and local governments. I just don't want to spend it on pension funds that are paying people obscene amounts of money. Let me ask you about retirement funds, Congresswoman Cheney. The leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, assured that Americans didn't have to make a mandatory withdrawal this year, which is good because their assets have deflated. He waived the 10% penalty. The Senate did, and the House agreed on withdrawals because some people have to go get that money. But to that end, I think if people have to go get money out of their retirement, they ought to be flat taxed at 10%. We've got, I think, $12 to $14 trillion in retirement account asset protected that if we allowed to come out at a 10% flat tax would be the greatest burst of liquidity ever. And there are many entrepreneurs who will lose everything if they don't use their retirement. So they're going to use it one way or the other. Have you folks talked about not penalizing people for using their retirement to save their lives?
We have, and I think it's a really important set of issues. We don't want people, as you say, to face a situation where they're going to lose everything, where they're, we provided some relief in terms of the required withdrawals, but I think that as we go forward and we look at future packages, we've got to make sure that this is an issue. We're looking for additional ways, whether it's the flat tax you mentioned too, or others. On the issue of retirement, though, I think there's another national security piece of this as well, which is the thrift savings plan. The United States Thrift Savings Plan, which is the retirement funds of our federal workers across the government, and we're facing the fact right now that significant portions of that are invested in Chinese companies, even some Chinese companies that have connections to the Chinese military-industrial complex. The extent to which that's another area that we have to absolutely take a look at. There's no justification that I can see for saying that you're going to have U.S. government employee funds, including some of the members of our military, going to fund Chinese companies, some of which are the very Chinese companies that are producing weapons, helping to supply weapons that could be used against us if we ever were to get into a conflict. So there is a huge amount of disentangling that's got to go on, and I think a really hard look at the extent to which we have made ourselves vulnerable because the Chinese have been able to infiltrate so many aspects of our system.
Let me close by waking up to this. And the PRC, look, I run the Nixon Foundation. I was very happy that we have the opening to China. There are many Chinese Americans who are very, very distraught that the Communist Party of that country has driven their country into the hole that it's in now. And they're doing everything they can PR-wise. But it seems to me that this country needs to be as serious about the CCP as it once was about the CCP of the USSR. And I'm hoping that President Xi, is facing his Khrushchev moment, 1964, when his Politburo, Khrushchev, just said, that's enough, you've screwed up. President Xi deserves actually to be exited from the world stage. What do you think we can do to alert America? Because it's much more difficult for us to reorient ourselves after 50 years of backslapping towards cold reality vis-a-vis the CCP, Liz Cheney.
I think that the coronavirus itself has got to be that wake-up call. I think that, when you look at what we're facing today here in the United States and around the world, you could end up with millions dead around the world. Certainly the global economy is ground to a halt because of this virus that came out of China, whether it came out of the wet market, whether it came out of the biological lab. It came out of China. Came out of practices that the Chinese Communist Party has been aware for decades, contain the kind of harm in them, the wet markets, the transmission potential from animal to human. They allowed this to happen, and then they covered it up, and they clearly cost additional lives because they were not willing to come forth with the information. They are continuing to cover up valuable information, and that cannot be allowed to go on. When a country operates like that, the rest of the world needs to say, you don't get to continue to be a member of the community of nations when you've unleashed something like that on the world when you could have stopped it, unless you clean up your act, unless you stop it. I think that you're right with respect to President Xi. I think that we need to have a very clear-eyed look at the Chinese Communist Party and the death and destruction that they've unleashed on the world, and that behavior has got to stop if they want to rejoin the community of nations.
Last question, Liz Cheney. When China was allowed to join the World Trade Organization, I believe it was under President Clinton, I'm not sure, it was said that the WTO would change China. In fact, China changed the WTO. It is now clear that the WHO has been compromised by the PRC in a way that Mr. Tedros should simply step down. He should quit. The Secretary of State was being a diplomat when he did not call for that yesterday. But what is your opinion on the WHO and whether or not we have international organization capture by the PRC, CCP there?
We have international organization captured globally by the CCP. With respect to the WHO, the fact that the head of the WHO was unwilling to say, for example, yes, it's right to cut off travel from China, was unwilling to acknowledge that there was, community transmission, has been touting the Chinese Communist Party line from the beginning of this, tells you that he absolutely should go. And again, we're in a situation where having somebody who is a puppet of the Chinese Communist Party running the WHO is costing lives around the world. And in order for that organization to play anywhere near the role we need it to play, it needs a new director, certainly.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney, thank you for joining me. My best to your entire family. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in the leadership.
Thanks so much, Hugh. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you.